the 49th session of the Senate, the first regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. We'd like to request a distinguished colleague from the province of Aurora, no other than Senator Edgardo Angara, to lead the chamber into prayer in this Valentine's Day today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Heavenly Father, we thank you for everyone gathered here today for the purpose of working for the people and to move this chamber forward. Once again, we are here to ask for your presence and take center stage as we go along our tasks as our country's backbone of legislation. We come before you today, O Lord, not only to ask for more, but to also thank you for all that you've done for us and for everyone that we care for. Heavenly Father, we know that life's obstacles are endless, and so we ask for more strength, more wisdom, and more understanding as we go through our troubles and tribulations. Please send down your Holy Spirit to fuel us and restore our strength. We are forever in need of your power, our dear Lord. Dalangin din po namin sa inyo, Panginoon, na pagpalain ninyo ng iba yung lakas ng damdamin ang mga mamamayan ng Turkey at ng Syria. Balutin niyo po ng pagmamahal ang mga naulila at tanggapin sa inyong kaharian ang kaluluwa ng mga namayapa. Sana'y inyong pawiin ang matinding pighati at tururan ninyo silang maging matapang na harapin ang mga pagsubok na ito. Nawa, Panginoon, manatiling ligtas ang 83 kataong search and rescue team na ipadala ng ating gobyerno sa Turkey upang tumulong sa mga rescue efforts doon. Sana'y gabayan po ninyo, Lord, ang mga pamilyang hindi lamang nawalan ng mga mahal sa buhay, kundi nawalan din ng kanilang mga tahanan at ng kanilang pag-asa sa buhay. Nahaharap po sila ngayon sa buhay na walang katiyakan, kaya't sana po ibuhos ninyo sa kanila ang inyong tulong at paggabay. May the missing be found sooner and be reunited with their grieving loved ones. This we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you. Secretary, please call the roll. Members.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, happy Valentine's Day to
Happy
all
Hearts
our,
Day, Mr. President.
Yeah, to all our lady senators that are here today.
And gentlemen, Mr.
And
President.
gentlemen,
Yes.
with your number one, huh? Valentine's.
The gentleman who prayed a while ago doesn't want to be discriminated, Mr. President.
Happy Valentine's to all, everyone.
And our Senate President pro tempore looks like Miss Universe, Mr. President. Today.
Yes.
Mr. President, at this juncture, let me first greet our guests from the gallery. We have with us the guests of our Senate President, Mig Subiri, Vice Mayor Ricky James Balansag of Lantapon, Bukidnon, and Vice Mayor Johnny Chavez of Impasugong, Bukidnon. Also with us, guests of Senator Jinggoy Estrada, Brigadier General Ahmad Omar, Chief of the Office of the Legislative Affairs of the AFP, Colonel Jude Ejercito, AFP OLA, Ms. Lulu Fernandez, and Ms. Belle De La Fuente.
To all those mentioned by the Majority Floor Leader, welcome po sa inyong Senado. Inyong Senado po ito. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 48th session, Monday, February 13, 2023, and consider the same as approved.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move that we proceed with the reference of business.
With no objections, we ask the Secretary to proceed with the reference of business.
Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 31 January 2023, it passed the following House bills and House joint resolution in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Joint Resolution extending the life of the Congressional Oversight Committee on Dangerous Drugs constituted pursuant to Section 95 of RA 9165 as amended.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
House Number 206, lowering the optional retirement age of government workers from 60 years to 56 years, amending for the purpose Section 13A of RA 8291.
To the Committee on Civil Service, Government Corporations, and Finance.
5702, providing for the restructuring and condonation of unpaid interest, penalties, and surcharges and loans secured by farmers, fisher folks, and agrarian reform beneficiaries from the DAR, the DA, the People's Credit and Finance Corporation, the Cooperative Development Authority, the NFA, and CADAN, and Rural Credit Guarantee Corporation.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food.
6505, renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Intercontinental Broadcasting Corporation under RA 8954.
To the Committee on Civil Service,
Public Services.
Government Corporations, and Finance. I'm sorry, my apologies. To the Committee on Public Services.
6572, establishing the public schools of the future in technology and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Basic Education, Sustainable Development Goals, and Finance.
6574, strengthening the promotion and delivery of mental health services and basic education through the hiring and deployment of mental health professionals, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education, Health, and Finance.
6579, creating 5 additional branches of the RTC in the National Capital Judicial Region to be stationed in Muntinlupa, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14D of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
6580, creating 2 additional branches of the RTC in the 4th Judicial Region to be stationed in Silang, Province of Cavite, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14E of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
6581, creating 3 additional branches of the Metropolitan Trial Court in the National Capital Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Parañaque, Metro Manila, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 27 of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
6582, creating 2 additional branches of the RTC in the 2nd Judicial Region to be stationed in Cabagan, Province of Isabela, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14B of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committees on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6583, creating 3 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court in the 10th Judicial Region to be stationed in the municipality of San Jose, Province of Dinagat Islands, and 2 additional branches of the Municipal Trial Court in the 10th Judicial Region to be stationed in the municipality of San Jose and Basilisa, Province of Dinagat Islands, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14K and Section 30 of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
6584, creating 1 additional branch of the RTC to be designated as special court for drugs cases in the 8th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Baybay, Province of Leyte. Appropriating funds therefore, amending Section 14I of Batas Pambasa Bilang 129 as amended.
Committees on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6585, creating 6 additional branches of the RTC in the 9th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Diplahan, Province of Zamboanga, Sibugay. Appropriating funds therefore, amending Section 14J of BP 129 as amended.
Committees on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6586, creating 3 additional branches of the RTC in the 10th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Valencia, Province of Bukidnon. Appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14K of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6587, creating 4 additional branches of the RTC in the 8th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Tacloban, Province of Leyte. Appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 14I of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6588, creating 12 additional branches of the RTC in the 4th Judicial Region to be stationed in Los Baños and the city of Cabuyao, Laguna, and 1 additional branch of the Municipal Trial Court in the cities in the 4th Judicial Region to be stationed in Cabuyao, Laguna, appropriating funds therefore, amending Section 14E and Section 29 of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committee on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6589, creating 11 additional branches of the Municipal Trial Court in cities in the 11th Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Davao, appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose Section 29 of BP 129 as amended.
To the Committees on Justice, Human Rights and Finance.
6630, prescribing the guidelines for the establishment and operation of local universities and colleges.
To the Committee on Higher Technical Vocational Education and Local Government.
6680, granting full insurance coverage to all qualified agrarian reform beneficiaries of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, amended for the purpose RA 6657 as amended by RA 9700.
Committees on Agriculture and Finance.
6688, renaming the Urdaneta City Bypass Road traversing barangays ng Kayasan, Santo Domingo, Santa Lucia, Camantiles, and Anonas in the city of Urdaneta, province of Pangasinan, to Ambassador Eduardo Danding M. Coanco Jr. Avenue.
To the Committee on Public Works.
6694, renaming the Tambacan Bridge traversing the Iligan River located in the barangay Tambacan, city of Iligan, in the northern Mindanao region as the Mariano Luch Badellas Senior Bridge.
To the Committee on Public Works.
6695, converting the Hibaon Elementary School in Barangay Hibaon, Sur, Mandurriao, Iloilo City into an integrated school to be known as the Hibaon Integrated School and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education and Finance.
6696, converting the Nabitasan Elementary School in Barangay Nabitasan, La Paz, District, Iloilo City into an integrated school to be known as the Nabitasan Integrated School and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education and Finance.
6697, establishing a national high school in Barangay Bolila, Municipality of Malita, Province of Davao Occidental, to be known as the Bolila National High School, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education and Finance.
6699, separating the Adang Elementary School, Ambatutong Extension in Barangay Bonot, Municipality of Paracelis, Province of Mountain Province from the Adang Elementary School, converting it into an independent elementary school to be known as the Ambatutong Elementary School, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Basic Education and Finance.
6700, separating the Bacoor National High School, Tabing Dagat Annex in Barangay Tabing Dagat, Bacoor City, Province of Cavite, from the Bacoor National High School, converting it into an independent national high school to be known as the Mariano Gomez National High School, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Basic Education and Finance.
6704, establishing a College of Medicine in the Benguet State University located in the Municipality of La Trinidad, Province of Benguet, to be known as the Benguet State University College of Medicine, appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Ways and Means and Finance.
Letter from the House informing the Senate that on 31 January 2023, it concurred with the Senate amendments to House Number 3968, and now converting the municipality of Carmona in the province of Cavite into a component city to be known as the City of Carmona.
To the Archives. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture, and with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1604 under Committee Report number 17. This is the ARAL Program Act, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this measure is that we are still in the period of interpellation. May I now move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, no other than the distinguished gentleman from the great city of Valenzuela, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to continue with his interpellation, our Minority Floor Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III.
Yes, to our distinguished colleague from Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, to sponsor, and our Minority Floor Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, to interpolate. You're both recognized, dear gentlemen. We'll just ask our colleagues to settle down as we are now going to start the process of interpellation. May I remind the Majority Floor Leader?
Mr. President, may we ask for a minute
Session
suspension, Mr.
suspended
President?
for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. This juncture, again, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III. So move, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have been recognized earlier. So if I may continue with my interpellation with our hardworking committee chairman, Mr. President. Last time, during the first round of my interpellation on the Aral bill, we established that this is mandatory. I think that was the word used by our chairman, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I use the term mandatory. However, after the interpellation and the comments from our good minority leader, I think the more appropriate word is required of the student, especially those students who fall below the minimum requirement or the minimum proficiency levels, and those who did not attend school year 2020 and beyond.
What would be, so we are spreading into the records, Mr. President, that it is not mandatory but required. What would be the significant difference with this change in the wording that we are, the descriptive word that we are using, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, mandatory normally has some form of penalty if you don't attend the program, Mr. President. But in this particular case, it will be required to a sense that if the students cannot attend the intervention program, there will be no penalty or punishment to the student.
Because this is being done for the student actually, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President.
I mean, siguro meron tayong minimum basic responsibility naman sa sarili rin natin that we want, di ba, we want to also improve ourselves, and if there is a test required in school, we should pass that test. I mean, that impulse should come from the person, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, that's absolutely correct, Mr. President. However, students encounter different difficulties in school, Mr. President, and there are so many reasons: family, income, status in life, and that's why it's important to have intervention programs so that those students will be helped and those students can cope up with the rigids of their studies.
Kailan po ba ito mag-umpisa, itong intervention natin? At what grade level, Mr. President?
It will start from kindergarten all the way to grade 10.
So sa kinder pa.
K to 10.
All levels, and then
Except for senior high school, Mr. President.
to 10. So wala na sa 11 and 12.
Wala na po, Mr. President.
Why is that so, Mr. President?
Well,
Hindi ba ito yung mga, if they're really behind and not knowledgeable about the fundamentals, they can never now cross over to higher education, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, based on I showed a slide earlier, based on the studies of World Bank, 11 and 12 learners are normally called independent learners. And during the pandemic, they managed to keep up using the self-learning modules, Mr. President. So, in other words, the regression with 11 and 12 is not as significant compared to the younger ages, Mr. President. So the normal schooling or the face-to-face classes can actually help them keep up with their academics, Mr. President. So this slide, Mr. President, this is a slide from World Bank, and basically what it's saying, the younger you are, the more difficult for the child to learn, because the younger kids are called. They will need their parents, or they will need assistance in terms of learning. The older you are, you're an independent learner. That means you can learn on your own. The regression was not as significant as the younger learners, Mr. President.
What does this chart or graph signify, Mr. President? How do we interpret this one, Mr. President? So So for that 6 year, for the 6 on the, ano ba to? Horizontal axis 6, it's child's age, and then there is a segment from 0 to around 15%. What does that mean, Mr.
Mr.
President?
President, the World Bank surveyed low-income household earners. No, basically this is probably 70 to 80% of all our learners in our public schools, and basically World Bank asked them if you learn or not. And of course, there were also assessments that were conducted. And basically, what World Bank is telling us using this slide is the older you are, the more you have learned. And the younger you are, the less effective the self-learner modules are, Mr. President. So that's why we're targeting the 6-year-olds all the way to 10-year-old, Mr. President. So K to 10, Mr. President.
Yes, grade 10 would be around what age, Mr. President?
Okay, 16.
Yeah, 16.
16. Sorry, it's 6 years old to 16 years old, Mr. President. So it's the grade levels is K to 10. The age level
Well, anyway.
is 6 to 16.
So can we keep that on the screen, Mr. President, that slide? No, but okay. Section 2 gives us the coverage of the ARAL program. What is our estimate, sir, Mr. President, of the number of learners covered by the ARAL program if we retain the wording of Section 2?
Yes, Mr. President. Again, in the absence of an assessment, we use a proxy, Mr. President. And the proxy that we use is also a survey from World Bank. This is their survey on learning poverty. I'll show that on the slide, Mr. President. So we're using the 90.9% of learners who cannot read. No? This is the proxy that we use because we don't have the actual assessment. So 90% times the number of learners for K to 6 is about 12.7 million. For K to 10 is about 19.5 million, Mr. President. So that is the universe that we are looking at, Mr. President.
Assumption is 90%.
Yes, that's a
90,
of course.
Across the K to 10 grade levels, 90% would be covered because of the Section 2 coverage sa paragraphs A and B.
Yes. Yes, because
90%.
yes, Mr. President, because the World Bank survey is on the basis of that is the minimum proficiency levels. Meaning, if you have the minimum proficiency, for example, for reading, for mathematics, that is the proxy number that we use, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So let's just assume that in one particular grade level there are 100 students. Under the ARAL program, 90 of the 100 would be required to undergo the ARAL intervention, which would be on an extra day or extra hours in the school premises, Mr. President. Kung ganyan kadami, 90%, at aminado natin we need intervention because they have not learned the fundamentals of science, language, and mathematics. Isn't it better to just go back to the curriculum and review that curriculum?
Actually, Mr. President, the Department of Education is also re-engineering the curriculum, Mr. President, because we found out, and it was also validated by DepEd, that we have too many subjects and too many competencies. And what is happening on the ground is our students are being taught with so many subjects, but they're not learning because they lack the time in terms of studying on their own or processing the subjects that they are being taught with. So, Mr. President, there's a move right now to reduce the number of competencies and to reduce the number of subjects in our schools, Mr. President. And that was elaborated by our Vice President during her basic education report, in which for Key Stage 1, meaning kindergarten to grade 3, they will focus on numeracy and literacy.
Yeah, kasi Mr. President, if we are going to proceed with the current pace of teaching science, language, and mathematics, where only 10% understand, wouldn't it be better to step on the brakes, slow down the pace, allow the 90 to catch up during regular class hours, Mr. President, rather than proceeding with regular class hours, palayo ng palayo ang gap ni 10% sa 90%, because we are using the words here, minimum proficiency level, and we're saying 90% do not have that minimum proficiency level. That means, Mr. President, subject matter, class day 1, then class day 2, class day 3, they will not be able to follow what was taken up in the class day 2, class day 3, because according to our description, they lack the minimum proficiency level, and 90% po ito. So, wouldn't it be the better approach, Mr. President, to just slow down the pace of classes and allow them to catch up?
Mr. President, I understand where our good minority floor leader is coming from. The 90% is really on the high side, but if you, I also showed another slide, no, and just to show the minority leader some of the rapid assessments that were conducted. Like for example, in NCR, Mr. President, let me just show the NCR slide. Page NCR. Yung rapid assessment. For example, here, Mr. This is the comprehensive rapid literacy assessment conducted by the DepEd and USAID in NCR. If you look at the non-readiness or those students who are not ready in grades 1, grade 2, grade 3, they vary. No? 40% are not ready in grade 1, 36% are not ready in grade 2, 25% are not ready in grade 3. So meaning the 99% that I showed is a high number, no? And different regions will have different number in terms of readiness, Mr. President. So, in other words, Mr. President, I know where you're coming from, no? Because 90% is almost everyone. But when you conduct a much detailed, much thorough and in detail assessment, you'll see different degrees. And also, if you break this down by city or by school, it will also become different. So the approach here, Mr. President, is the ARAL program will now enable schools to address those learners who are not ready, depending on how many learners who are not ready in their schools. For example, in Valenzuela, this number will totally change because we have an intervention program on a regular basis, or our literacy numbers will probably be much lower than this because we have a constant regular intervention program every summer, Mr. President. So my point of the matter, Mr. President, the 90% is on the high side. But we are just making sure that we talk about the high side in order to plan properly moving forward. But definitely when we go granular, it becomes much different in that scenario. Even per school will be much different, Mr. President.
Mr. President, but I'm sure that those who do not possess the minimum proficiency levels required in language, mathematics, and science even on a per subject basis, would be substantial. Because if it were not substantial, no one would have thought of this oral intervention program, Mr. President. They are substantial in number, Mr. President.
In terms of,
And then my next question is, from the point of view of His Honor, what percentage is substantial?
well, Mr.
Enough,
President,
substantial enough so that we need this oral intervention.
well, Mr. President, in my personal opinion, every learner is very important, no? And that's why again, I indulge my colleague and good minority leader. I keep on referring back to Valenzuela because that's the only model that I have encountered. And even though in our number in Valenzuela, when we started our frustrated learners and frustrated readers and non-readers there, it's about 60%. We still launch our intervention program. And based on our experience there, our success rate is about 90%, meaning we managed to reduce non-readers and frustrated readers by about 90%. The 10% is what the good minority leader pointed out, that they can be helped during the regular class hours already. No? So that's the model that we followed. So in this particular case, applying it to the national scale, when we were studying this bill, we factored in the high side, which is the number that we've seen from the World Bank. But when we go granular, it will go down. But what is important here is we have already a law that is ready to intervene, no? If necessary. If the school thinks it's necessary, then they can use the program to intervene already.
Optional po ba pala ito sa school level? I thought this would be, if this becomes a law, this becomes available nationwide, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, we are giving
Especially in a public school. Optional in the private schools, but
Yes.
in the public schools,
In the public school, Mr. President, we're giving the principal and the division the flexibility to apply what type of intervention program. Like, for example, an intervention program can be one-on-one, or it can be, in Valenzuela, it's 25:1. In some models that we've seen, it's 10:1. So we'll give them the flexibility depending on the learner, depending on the assessment, and depending on number of learners that they will see who will need the intervention program.
no, but there will be an oral intervention program. It's just on the mechanics, on the class size, maybe on the schedule.
Like Mr. President,
Oral would be available to all and required of all if you fall under Section 2, Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President, like for example, one of the most important features of the ARAL program is Section 7, which is tutors under the ARAL program. We expanded the types of tutors that can be tapped by DepEd. For example, if you are a student taking up education, your practicum or your on-the-job training can be served as credits when you apply to DepEd. If you are taking, let's say I'm a college student and I'm taking literacy LTS, literacy training service, the credits for LTS can be used for your NSTP. So those type of concepts can now be used by the different divisions, by the different schools. It's available now nationwide because it's not available nationwide. For example, if a school in Nueva Ecija wants to tap college students, they cannot do it unless the university will talk to them. No? So, but with this law, they will now have a core of tutors that they can tap into.
Mr. President, you would agree with me that there would be a case, an actual class where 90% of the students, let's say in mathematics, would not have the minimum proficiency level. Let's us imagine this class, 90%. Kasi let's say in Valenzuela, mababa. So para maging 90% sa nationwide, meron dapat mataas. I'm sure merong mataas.
Yeah.
under current law and current DepEd circulars, doesn't the teacher have the flexibility to slow down the pace of the class, slow down the pacing of the lesson plan to allow the 90% to catch up with the 10%? Kasi otherwise, pansinan ni teacher, ang kausap niya, sa 100, 10 lang ang kausap niya. Yung 90, kalat-kalat na po yung mata. And then, alam naman, Monday to Friday, itutuloy niya yung ganong situation. Then Saturday, mag-aaral naman yung 90, aral program.
Yeah.
It's all pointless, Mr. President. We wasted the 5 days of the 90%.
Mr. President, that has been a subject of long debate, no? And there's actually a allegation that DepEd is passing students who cannot read and who cannot count to the next level. That has been an allegation that I've heard many, many times. But the scenario on the other side, Mr. President, if the 90% students, so the 90% of learners who are not proficient in math will not be given assistance, the effects there is the teacher, it's either the teacher will fail them, all 90%, they will be carried over to the next, to the same grade level, or the teacher will probably undertake some form of intervention program, or remedial class or other intervention program. But in that particular case, the teacher will need additional help, definitely. The teacher cannot come up with a remedial program and teach all 90%. They will need additional tutors or need additional teaching aids. This is where the law will come in. No?
So, as I get from the answer, Mr. President, there is no flexibility as of the moment. Kasi in effect, the teacher will have to follow the lesson plan, communicate with only 10% of his or her students, and then rely on the intervention program so that the 90% can catch up. Sana, in this particular case, kasi it's obvious that it's either the teacher is not an effective teacher or the lesson plan is really to start with beyond already the competence or proficiency of the students from class day 1. So therefore, there should be some flexibility for the teacher to slow down the pace. I mean, back to basics and back to basics for the next 5 or 2 weeks so that the 90% can catch up.
Yeah, Mr. President, I understand where the good minority leader is coming from. I think in terms of slowing down, you can only slow down so much. No? You cannot slow down to the extent that you use up the 200 schooling days of the year. I think they can slow down to an extent that the 90% or the majority of the students can catch up. But eventually, they will have examination, and the deciding factor there is whether you pass or you fail your students. No? So in normal practice, the teacher will employ remedial classes, intervention programs, tutoring, talk to the parents to help the students. And this is where we are now giving some tools to our teachers and to our schools to use in order to help the student. No? These are the tools that we are giving them.
But it's the same, Mr. President. It's the same concept. It's an after-class intervention.
Yes,
I'm asking about the during class flexibility. So, does the teacher have that flexibility?
Yes, Mr. President, there is.
Okay.
The teacher will have flexibility, but it's not. It can only do so much, no? Because they have 200 school days to follow. They have a lesson plan and a plan to what to teach for the next 200 days. And the teacher can only have so much flexibility in terms of how to execute that lesson plan, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, this will be required. We're not using the word mandatory, but required at all public schools from K to 10 grade levels available to private schools upon request. So therefore, this will necessitate a large manpower pool, Mr. President, to execute the said program. I think the law mentions, the bill mentions teachers, para teachers, and tatlo. And student tutors,
The
Mr.
student
President.
tutors, yeah.
They are defined in the measure, but these tutors, or let's call them tutors, Mr. President, are compensated, if I'm not mistaken, for their time.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, can we talk about the budget that we have projected for an effective ARAL program, Mr. President?
Okay. Mr. President, I'll show a slide. No, again, in the absence of an actual in the absence of an actual assessment system, we use a benchmark number that we came out from our research, and this is 550 pesos. This is the learner, 550 pesos per learner. This is a recommendation from World Bank based on their study on many intervention programs around the world. And just to give the body an idea, right now, through an MOOE, we pay about 250 pesos a year for elementary and 480 pesos a year for junior high school. So 550 pesos is more vicinity. And the 550 pesos is basically the optimum allocation per student, Mr. President. And I'll show you another slide, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just to be clear, so if the tutor has, let's say, 10 students, he can be expected to be compensated at 5,500? Ganun po ba? Is that the value of that per learner allocation? The budget top, sir.
Well, that is the budget for the entire program, Mr. President. And I'll go later on.
On the left side, Mr. President, yung MOE allocation per learner, I don't get it. Is that our total budget for DepEd and we divided it with the learners?
Yes, Mr. President. That's amount of
What the state spends?
yes,
for the-
to operate the schools.
Yeah, for each elementary student and for each junior high school student.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes,
So
thank you.
just to give you some point of comparison, Mr. President, we looked at other intervention programs, no, around the world. For example, in the United States, they allocated about $122 billion. That's about $2,400 per learner. We'll flash that on the slide. In the UK, it's $1.2 billion. That's about $333 per learner for secondary school, and $175 per primary school per student in the primary school. But we also compared developing nations such as Bangladesh and India, and on a per learner basis, in Bangladesh it's about $8 per learner, so that's about 400 pesos more or less, and in India it's about $6 per learner more or less, Mr. President. So that's about 300 pesos per learner. So we more or less looked at the budget or the amount spent per learner, Mr. President. And this is the benchmark that we saw, Mr. President. So if you multiply that, for example, by the number of, slide is that, yung 7 billion.
10 billion yata. Multiplied by 19 million, no? The expected...
19, sir.
Should we multiply it by 19 million, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes. Yung, the,
10 billion.
yung 7 billion.
10.4 ang sa akin. 10.4.
16, sir.
6.
May 7 billion. Hindi ko nalabansan. Ang liit yung mga yung liit na picture. Ano ba? Here.
Yes. This one, Mr. President, to cover to K to 6, because we put the priority will be K to 6, kindergarten to grade 6. The amount needed is about 7 billion. For K to 10 is about 10 billion, Mr. President. But we also have to put this in context, Mr. President. Based on the NEDA report, NEDA ran some studies that if we continue business as usual right now, without any intervention program, the country stands to lose about 10.1 trillion pesos in the next 40 years in terms of productivity and income loss, Mr. President. So if you divide 7 billion, assuming we just target the priority grades, 7 billion divided by 10 billion, sorry, 10 trillion is, it's about 0.07%, Mr. President, for a one-year program. So, in other words, Mr. President, we also need to look at
the losses.
the adverse effect if we don't do anything. No? And NEDA has already projected productivity losses, income losses, if you don't do anything. No? That's why NEDA is also proposing to to launch an intervention program so we minimize or mitigate the productivity losses, Mr. President. So my point of the matter there is we have to put this in context also, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President. So, the short answer would be around
The short
10
answer will
billion?
be around
10
7 billion.
7.
Seven.
Mr. President, Section 5 gives us the coverage for language and mathematics, grades 1 to 10. And
Yes, Mr.
for
President.
science, grades
Yeah.
3 to 10.
Yeah.
So it does not stop at grade 6, so up to 10. So
Yes, Mr. President.
So you have to use the
High side.
the
Yes, Mr.
10 plus billion pesos, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President, you're correct, Mr. President. I only, we during our hearing, Mr. President, the resource persons emphasized that in terms of prioritization, the K to 6 should be prioritized. But you're right, Mr. President, that the program will run until grade 10, up to
Well, we
grade
can,
10.
if that is the intention of the sponsor, Mr. President, we can amend the wording of Section 5 to reflect some prioritization if the sponsor is open to that, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm more than happy to receive suggestions.
Mr. President, Senator
President.
Tolentino wants to be recognized.
Mr. President,
Mr. President.
just an interjection with
Yes, Senator Tolentino is
the
recognized.
permission of the two gentlemen.
Yes,
Mr. President,
Mr.
I recall during our last debates that the notion of having an executive program for this was accepted by the good sponsor. May I know if in all the estimations made, the concept of an abridged aral program
Yeah.
was likewise computed?
No, Mr. President. The computation here did not take into consideration the abridged or the shortened RL program. This is calculating the high side of the program, Mr. President. So, but definitely, if you go through the bill, Mr. President, we put a lot of emphasis on learner-centered intervention. So, meaning the learner should be, what is good for the learner should be put as a priority. No, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all intervention for all students. We have to really assess what the learner needs, and based on what the learner needs, it can be the regular long program or the abridged program, depending on how the learner will catch up, Mr. President. But in essence, we're just giving the schools the tools in order to launch an intervention program.
Just two quick questions, Mr. President. The good minority leader was asking about the assessment needs. Who will assess the students? That's number one. Who will assess the tutors? That's number two. And is it part of the cost estimates that we have now? How do we evaluate the success? How do we put a correct parameter or barometer as to the success of this program, Mr. President. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat for the time given to this representation, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the learners will be assessed by DepEd because the infrastructure is already there. And typically, they will have rapid assessments to determine the proficiency levels of the student. In terms of the tutors, Mr. President, for example, in Section 7, for tertiary level students, they should be above the 75th percentile of the respective school. So we're just getting the cream of the crop, so to speak, Mr. President. But even though they are the cream of the crop, DepEd will still come up with training programs in order for them to be effective tutors for under this program. So for example, if you're a student studying, let's say, engineering, you should be above 75% percentile, and then you will still be trained by DepEd because not all engineering students can be good tutors. No? So you will also be trained by DepEd. But that will happen in the schools already. And we have master teachers, we have principals, we have the whole DepEd infrastructure per school that can do the training, Mr. President. They don't have to come to Metro Manila to be trained. It will happen in our schools, Mr. President.
Just one quick question, Mr. President. So is Your Honor now speaking of a mini licensure, mini LET exam for the tutors? LET for the tutors?
No, Mr. President.
An abridged training program which would lead to a certification for the tutors that would eventually pave the way for them to step up and become a full LET practitioner, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President. We just want to tap college students, as tutors because we have a lot of college students who are who can act as tutors because they have the basic skills, they have the basic knowledge, especially in terms of tutoring on reading, tutoring on mathematics. So those are the subjects that they will be tutoring in. And these are just fundamental subjects that we feel that our college students can help out in terms of tutoring.
I mentioned that, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I mentioned that, Mr. President, because perhaps in 5 or 6 or 7 out of 100 tutors, some of them will be enticed to join the teaching profession eventually, paving the way for the additional membership in our teaching force. And these are students now who are really passionate to teach, Mr. President. So perhaps the notion of giving them an opening to become teachers later on would really hit two birds in one stone. You teach the students and you produce a new crop of teachers. Yun lamang po, Mr. President. Maraming salamat.
Yeah, Mr. President, you're absolutely correct. In fact, that came out during our hearing that those who serve as tutors should be given some form of merit priority in DepEd. So we included in Section 15 that your experience as tutors will be considered as part of your merit selection plan to be promulgated by the CSC, Mr. President. So, in other words, if you were tapped as tutor, it will form part of your credits or your merits when you apply to DepEd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall resume. So, these tertiary level students who will be acting as tutors are given incentives under Section 15 and also to be credited with the LTS, Literacy Training Service, under the NSTP. Yung NSTP po ba, that is administered by the CHED, as far as I understand, Mr. President. So by virtue of this section, the CHED will already will already credit them with the NTSP.
Yes, Mr.
Credits?
President. That's the intention, Mr. President. So there are three components, the CWTS, the LTS, and the ROTC. If you are taking the LTS, because LTS is Literacy Training Service, which part of your activity is to teach.
Yes.
And most of the students who take the LTS are education graduates or education students. It will form part of their credit already.
Yung current LTS, tinuturuan mo tertiary din. Yung current LTS, Mr. President, under the NSTP, mga volunteer students din yun, tertiary level students din. Sino po ba tinuturuan nila doon sa LTS?
Iba-iba, Mr. President. It really depends on the college.
So,
They have a
pwedeng-
different. It really depends. Sometimes they're deployed to geographically isolated areas, and they teach there. It depends.
Yes, to teach basic education or tertiary level also students.
These are college students,
Yeah,
and they teach different. May basic education.
Okay. So,
May OSY. Yeah, I know
may
some of
okay.
them are top even for ALS in
Sige.
some areas. Depends on
Okay.
the program, Mr.
So
President.
there is, yes, so under the existing LTS, a tertiary level student can teach basic education student, grades from K to 10, di ba?
Yes.
Theoretically, pwede mangyari yun.
Yeah.
But since the ARAL program compensates now the tertiary level student who will tutor under ARAL, will this not kill now that LTS program where we have volunteer students not compensated, di ba? Under the NSTP, they are not compensated. So will this program possibly kill that aspect of the NSTP where there is LTS tertiary level student teaching K to 12 students, Mr. President?
No, not really, Mr. President, because if I'm a student, as an example, if I'm a student, then I volunteered to be a tutor. I can use that time as a tutor and apply it as credits to my LTS. No, so, in other words, it's an incentive for me. No, so instead of, let's say I'm an LTS student and I'm deployed to teach, let's say OSY, out of school youth. I will now choose the ARAL program because I get credits from that program, Mr. President. So I have now options.
You get more than credits, Mr. President. di ba? Isn't that the tertiary level student compensated?
They're not but they can be compensated. They can be compensated. But it's for this LTS, they will not be compensated. Only the credits will be applied, Mr. President.
So thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. So incentive nga. Kung ganon, if there is no compensation, it's still purely volunteer work. Still,
Yes, Mr.
Still
President.
purely volunteer work. Yes.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. Can we now go back to section 5, Mr. President? Inumpisahan natin si Aral from K to 10. Bakit as early as K? I mean, ang sabi ng law, for kindergarten learners, the Aral program shall focus on building foundational skills aimed at strengthening their literacy and numeracy competencies. Ba't hindi natin gawing part of the curriculum po ito sa kindergarten level, Mr. President?
Yeah, Mr. President, in our discussion during the hearing, well, number one, the kindergarten forms part of the formative years of of the youth, of the child. And it's important to strengthen the foundational skills of the child during those years, especially on numeracy and literacy. At the same time, Mr. President, another reason is we have to remember that these students, the kindergarten, never attended schools for 2 years. Some of them never seen a teacher. Some of them have never talked to any classmates. And with our discussion with the expert, they also want to come up with an intervention program for these students so that their foundational skills will be strengthened, especially on mathematics, science, and reading.
Yung example po ba natin, yung pumasok na who did not enroll for 1 or 2 years, when they go back to school, they're at kindergarten level. Yan po ba yung example po natin? Therefore, that child will undergo the lesson plans for the kindergarten level.
Yes, Mr. President.
Kaya nga, it does not build foundational skills aimed at strengthening their literacy and numeracy competency. Isn't that part of the current kindergarten lesson plan, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, it's part of their curriculum, Mr. President. And of course, we want the student to go with the curriculum. However, we also admit that some of the students are falling behind their subjects and proficiency levels. So,
That early, Mr. President?
yes, Mr. President,
So sinusukat na sila that early and then they fall behind. Hindi po ba dapat nga foundational skills nga
Yeah,
tinutukoy? Kasi I'm questioning, I'm focusing my question here, Mr. President, is because if the kindergarten learner, student, is required to undergo aral, hindi po ba that person, that child is required to either stay extra hours in school or come back on a non-school day for the aral program? That's the implication, Mr. President. So why not just why not tweak the kindergarten curriculum? Teach them the basics if they're not yet taught the basics, Mr. President.
I get the point of the good minority leader, Mr. President. I get your track, Mr. President, and I do agree, Mr. President. When we were discussing this bill, Mr. President, we just want to make the tools available from kindergarten all the way to grade 10, Mr. President. And based on our discussion with the experts and also with the Department of Education, the tutoring program can happen as early as kindergarten, strengthening their foundational skills during those times. So if, for example, they see that a student in kindergarten, especially coming from marginalized families, will need additional intervention, then they have tools that they can tap into, for example, tutoring, to help the student or the students, Mr. President. So that is the discussion during the hearing. But I totally see where the good minority leader is coming from.
Siguro yan, we have to revisit yung sa kindergarten talaga na, well, at saka actually in Japan, Mr. President, as far as I know, they don't give grades to up to a certain level, kinder to up to a certain level, kasi the point is what they want the children to learn in school are social skills, maybe etiquette, good behavior, ganun eh. So, ngayon tayo, sa kinder pa lang, we claim that we already can spot a child who is not having the minimum proficiency level in science, language, and math at kinder level. Then we will require that child to stay extra hours or come back on another school day. Why not just tweak the curriculum, Mr. President, and then teach them? Kasi yung hindi pa nga applicable yung back to basics na salita sa kanila eh. Because this is the time that they are now learning the basics.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, Mr. President, good minority leader. I see where your focus is. I think maybe we can just tweak the wording in this measure. I think our intention is to give DepEd the tools, through the tutors, through the incentives, in order to help kindergarten students strengthen their foundational skills. Again, the kindergarten students will have the classroom, but admittedly, some students will need extra assistance in order to cope up, and that's where the bill will come in. But I can see the point of the good minority leader.
Siguro,
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
can,
if the sponsor is open to, amending the coverage,
Yes.
siguro ganun na lang. Let's allow our kindergarten students some playtime,
Yeah,
socializing time. At the same time, introduction to the basics now.
Yeah.
They cannot, ulitin ko, they cannot go back to basics.
in
Ito
fact,
yung
Mr.
aral.
President, just to add to that, there's no science in kindergarten. The science subject is taught in grade 3, Mr. President. So I think it's just the wording of the law that that we need to tweak in order to reflect the intention. The intention really for kindergarten is to come up with an intervention program to strengthen foundational, just reading, counting, and that's it. No? And but they're not going to be in the same boat as, let's say, the grade 1 to grade 10 insofar as the other subjects are concerned.
I'll just summarize my point, Mr. President. No? Sa kindergarten level, we should not aim to intervene so that we will strengthen their foundational skills. That should be what they get at kindergarten level. I mean, if the sponsor agrees, let's we can capture the wording. And now, thank you for answering my next question. Ang next question ko sana is why yung science intervention is grade 3, yung pala yun yung start ng
Yes.
start ng science
The science
lesson.
starts at grade 3.
Thank you for answering my next question. So, you're a mind reader now, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
So, yung training of the tertiary level students to become efficient tutors, nasama na po natin sa budget natin na 10 billion yun o hindi pa po? Kasi may gastos din po yan. The training of the students.
That's the training of the
Of the
tutors.
students who will become tutors.
Mr. President, we have a benchmark number, and we only came up with a benchmark number, Mr. President, because the program will really depend on the assessment, Mr. President. So, to answer you directly, it will be part of the 550 pesos, Mr. President. Yeah.
Yeah, part
Because
of
the 550 pesos, when we were looking at the Ghana model, it includes training, includes deployment, includes materials. That's the components of the Ghana model, Mr. President.
Okay, so Mr. President, I think through our exchange, this representation's understanding of the measure has improved, Mr. President. Pero yun lang po yung last question ko po siguro, why we stop at 10? Grade, hindi ko pa rin makuha yung na, you mean to say because after grade level 10, the students can now rely on the self-learning modules, even though they may be still deficient in the minimum proficiency levels, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Based on our analysis, Mr. President, the self-learning modules are effective for independent learners. We're flashing it on the slide. So the likelihood of the grade 11 and grade 12 students is very low, Mr. President. So just to be targeted on the program, we concentrated on 6-year-olds until 16, Mr. President. So this is the justification that we used based on the World Bank.
Mr. President,
Presentation.
hindi po ba sa tunay na buhay may mga college students na nagpapatutor pa rin?
Meron, Mr. President. Yeah.
And then, kaya nga, so, sa
Yeah.
tunay na buhay yun, I mean, college ka na, lumampas ka na nga sa grades 11 and 12, nagpapatulong ka pa rin because nahirapan ka sa lessons mo sa college. Meaning to say,
Yep.
mga siguro doon sa mga algebra, hindi pa rin niya maintindihan, di lalo na sa calculus, mga ganun. So I do not know where they got this idea, Mr. President, and Uh, so what if they can rely more on themselves to the self-learning modules? Ang tanong, isn't it a fact that there are also some who do not possess the minimum proficiency levels required in science, language,
Yeah.
and math?
But Mr. President, we're focusing on the foundational skills, no? On three subject matters, which is math, science, and reading. And Mr. President, if you reach that higher grade levels, no, grades 11s and grade 12s, you should already know how to read, you should already know how to count, and you should have basic concepts in science, Mr. President. So the philosophy of the RR Bill is to strengthen the foundation. No? And the subject matters being taught actually from junior high school to senior high school are not foundational subjects anymore. These are subjects that are more complex. So that's the philosophy. That's the reason why we didn't include senior high school anymore, Mr. President, because those are complex subjects already. These are just foundational subjects, Mr. President.
Okay, so talagang ano pala ito, in language, just reading, know how to read in Tagalog,
Know how to
in
read.
Tagalog, in Filipino, and in English siguro to?
Yes,
Ano po?
know how to read,
And then-
know how to count, and
then
basic
count,
concepts.
count up to 20, you know? I'll count.
Kasi at least the basics, at least the basic
my daughter
numeracy.
who is not yet 3 years old can count up to 100 already, Mr. President.
Yeah, just
Okay,
the foundation lang, to strengthen the foundation.
So we can theoretically end this earlier, kung ganun.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, so we can end it even before grade 10, ganun?
Theoretically, yes, Mr. President. But based on our discussion with the experts, in fact, our initial thought on this is only grade 1s to 6. But DepEd and some of the experts suggested to us to expand it to grade 10, no? Because
What was the justification given, Mr. President, given your explanation that it is just about the basics of reading,
Yes.
writing, reading, counting, and science concepts?
the reason for that, Mr. President, based on their rapid assessment surveys, they are seeing some grade students from grade 6 to grade 10 who still need foundational support, no? Support in foundational subjects. No? And sad as it may be, they want the tools, no? The tutoring tools available in this law to be present when they give intervention programs to those students. It's sad, but they feel that they need those tools at least ready to be deployed.
Anyway, the longer the program is, the more chances for the learner to out of his or her own volition and initiative, learn the basics of science, language, and math.
Yes, Mr. President. But you're right. Initially, our thoughts on this is just K to 6, and because we feel that K to 6 are the most important years to build the foundation in order for the student to keep up in the junior and senior levels, senior high school levels.
So, thank you, Mr. President. Siguro, if the good sponsor will just entertain some tweaking of
Yes, Mr. President.
measure to make it siguro more realistic or feasible given our parati natin ginagamit limited fiscal space. Pero syempre, this is education. Priority ito. If, the money, the amount spent will go to a good cause naman. Eh.
Yeah.
Ano yung, sir, 10 trillion yung projected.
10.1 trillion for the next 40 years. Productivity losses, Mr.
Productivity
President.
losses if we do not act. So,
Yeah.
so thank you for the time, Mr. President. At least this representation has been clarified about.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, to the good minority leader, and definitely he made excellent points in sharpening the bill, and we'll work with His Honor to come up with proposed amendments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sa kindergarten.
Majority Leader?
Yes, Mr. President.
Next week.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, no other member wishes to interpolate and ask questions on this particular measure. I will now move, Mr. President, that we close the period of interpellation and debate. So move, Mr. President.
There is a motion to close the period of interpellations and debate. Any objection? Hearing none, the period. The period of interpellations and debate is hereby closed.
Next week,
Thank you.
Mondays or Diba?
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1604. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the period of, we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1604.
Move for a minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with additional reference of business. So move, Mr. President.
And the objection, there being none, the Secretary may now proceed.
Additional reference of business, bills on first reading. Senate number 1870, strengthening and revitalizing the development of the salt industry in the Philippines, appropriating funds therefore, amending RA 8550 and for other purposes. Senator Legarda.
Referred to the Committee on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship, Ways and Means and Finance.
1871, decriminalizing qualified theft of coconuts and reclassifying it as a simple theft under Article 308, further amending for the purpose Article 310 of the Revised Penal Code as amended. Senator Ontiveros.
Referred to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1872, requiring the completion of economics and personal finance literacy course as an elementary, secondary, tertiary graduation requirement in public and private schools, local universities and colleges, state and private colleges and universities. At Senator Tulfo.
Referred to Committee on Basic Education and Higher Technical and Vocational Education.
1873, an act mandating the installation of timers in traffic lights. Senator Tulfo.
Referred to Committee on Public Works, Public Services and Finance.
1874, amending Section 13, Article 16 of RA 11054, otherwise known as the Organic Law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, as amended by RA 11593, for the purpose of extending the transition period to ensure the successful implementation of the Annex on Normalization under the Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro, and allowing the first regular election for the Bangsamoro Parliament to be synchronized with the 2028 national elections. Senator Tulfo.
Referred to the Committee on Local Government.
1875, creating the Philippine Renewable Energy Corporation, defining its powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Tulfo.
Referred to Committee on Energy, Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Ways and Means and Finance.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution number 475, expressing sincere condolences of the Senate of the Philippines on the death of writer and women's rights advocate Luwalhati Torres Bautista. Senator Revilla Jr.
Referred to Committee on Rules.
476, directing the Senate Committee on Labor to conduct an inquiry to review existing policies on the minimum wage increases with the end in view of improving the standard of living and quality of life for workers, particularly those in the lower income bracket. Senator Tulfo.
Referred to Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development.
477, directing the Senate Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations to conduct an inquiry on the rampant and unabated agricultural smuggling in the Philippines. Senator Pimentel III.
Referred to the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations.
478, directing the Senate proper committees to conduct an inquiry to address the fast transmission of hand, foot, and mouth disease among Filipino children in the country. Senator Binay.
Referred to Committee on Health and Demography.
479, commending Glenn Suerte Banaguas for becoming the first Filipino science diplomat named as Fellow at the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce in the United Kingdom. Senator Binay.
Referred to Committee on Rules.
480, expressing the profound sympathy of the Philippine Senate to the casualties of the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Senator Tulfo.
Referred to Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Committee Report Number 19. This is on the alleged overpriced and outdated laptops procured by the Department of Education through the Department of Budget and Management Procurement Service. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, there being no other member who wish to interpellate, I move that we close the period of interpellations and debate.
Is there an objection? There being none, period of interpellation is hereby closed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we open the period of amendments. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the distinguished sponsor of this committee report number 19, no other than the distinguished gentleman from the great province of Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino. So move, Mr. President.
The sponsor, Senator Francis Tolentino, is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee has some sundry committee amendments, Mr. President, by way of an omnibus motion, Mr. President. We propose to change the phrase Rule 7.7.3, found on pages 93, 108, and 169 to Section 7.7.3. Mr. President, I so move.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we have no further committee amendments.
Majority Leader,
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of amendments. So move, Mr. President.
is there an objection? There being none, period of amendment is hereby closed.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move for the approval of Committee Report Number 19 and the adoption of the recommendations contained therein. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the distinguished
Thank you, Mr.
gentleman
President.
from San Juan City, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, would like to make a manifestation. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
Senator Jingo Estrada is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, in as much as I really want to be consistent, since I signed a dissenting opinion with regard to the committee report of our good friend here, Senator Francis Tolentino, I would like to register my vote as no, the negative side. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
So noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, would like to be recognized. I move that he be recognized, Mr.
The
President.
Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pindel, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a manifestation that this representation filed a separate opinion to the report. So I will no longer move to amend the main report because I filed the separate opinion. And there are quite a few differences, Mr. President. For as long as it will be attached to the main report, this representation would be happy already, Mr. President.
14 na to.
Yes, Senator Tolentino.
If I may be allowed to reply to the manifestation. Indeed, Mr. President, the minority report will be part of the committee report, Mr. President.
So noted. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we'd likewise congratulate our distinguished colleague, the chairperson of the Senate Committee, Blue Ribbon Committee of this August Chamber. Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Thank you. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1849 under Committee Report number 23. This is an act strengthening professionalism in the armed forces of the Philippines, amending RA 11709. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there objection? There being none, assumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 1849 under Committee Report number 23 is now in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this measure is that we are still in the period of interpellation. I now move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, the distinguished gentleman from the city of San Juan, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, and to interpellate our minority leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. So move, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, the sponsor, Senator Jingo Estrada, and the minority leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, are hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the good gentleman yield to some questions on the measure, Mr. President?
My privilege and pleasure, Mr. President.
Well, let me start by, first of all, congratulating our chairman, Mr. President, for this hard work and for immediately acting on the issue. Parang ramdam lang natin yung reklamo, and then buti nakilusan na ating chairman, and then he has this committee report and a very specific measure to address the problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is my sole duty as your chairman of the Committee on National Defense to act on this measure right away, since there is a lot of talks within the military with regard to the rumbling within the military.
Yeah, Mr. President, RA 11709 is a relatively new law. It was meant also to address a certain problem. So may we know what problem or issue or concern was RA 11709 supposed to have addressed, Mr. President?
Yes, the existing law right now is practically new. Is Republic Act 11709. It was enacted into law last July 1 of 2022. Wala pang isang taon, and here we are trying to amend the specific five specific provisions here, because Republic Act 11709 caused a marked increase of forced attrition for our officers as it fixed the terms of 14 key positions, decreased the number of generals, and shortened the tenure and grade of officers. All these caused bottleneck in the movement, the ascent of our officers in the organizational ladder, the career progression of our armed forces of the Philippines officers were severely and adversely affected. Mr. President.
Yes, yeah, the RA 11709 ended up having those provisions, but I think the original measure was filed precisely to address the so-called revolving door. And as far as I can recall and understand that issue, it involves the frequent changes due to retirement of the AFP Chief of Staff. And yet, that was the problem. And yet the result was 11709, which gave us some unintended consequences, as mentioned by our good sponsor after studying the issue. Now, we have this committee report, this bill now, meant to address the bottlenecks and the other problems mentioned by our sponsor arising from 11709. But is this measure under consideration still answering that original problem that we wanted to have answered, which is the revolving door phenomenon, Mr. President?
Yes, definitely. This will address also this is trying to avoid the revolving door policy. RA 11709, which was which was enacted several months ago, as far as I'm concerned, is a good law. There was a good intention that law. Precisely, that is to avoid the revolving door policy. Kasi po, ang nangyayari nung araw, kapag may bagong presidente o malapit na matapos ang termino ng isang presidente, pagka halimbawa kaibigan niya ito magre-retire, halimbawa meron na ng 2 buwan na natitira sa kanilang pagsiservisyo, i-appoint na lang as chief of staff para lang pag-uwi nila sa bahay, may pagmamalakan nila sa kanilang pamilya, sa kanilang mga kaibigan, ako isang naging chief of staff. Kaya yun po ang ating iniwasan.
At ano pong provision sa ating panukalang batas ang sinasagot po yung revolving door phenomenon po na yan?
Sandali lang po, Mr. President. Dito po here in Section 2, if I may read, Mr. President, tour of duty and appointment of key officers. The Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines shall have a maximum tour of duty of 3 consecutive years, which shall commence on the date the appointment is signed unless sooner terminated by the President. Letter B, the following officers holding key positions in the AFP shall have a maximum tour of duty of 2 consecutive years, which shall commence on the date the appointment is signed, unless sooner terminated by the President. Meaning there are 3
Yes,
commanding
yeah,
generals, commanding generals of the Philippine Army, Philippine Navy,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the commanding general of the Philippine Air Force.
Yes, Mr. President. So that's found in Section 1 of the bill, which amends Section 2 of RA 11709. So why did we go beyond the position of the Chief of Staff? Was there a problem also of revolving door in as far as Commanding General of the Philippine Army, Commanding General of the Philippine Air Force, and Flag Officer in Command of the Philippine Navy?
Well, our Republic Act, the existing law, Republic Act 11709, provided the fixed tour of duty for 14 key officers. Now we had limited it to 5. The Chief of Staff, the 3 commanding generals, and the
PMA.
PMA
Yes.
superintendent.
Yes, Mr. President. So ganun nga ang nangyari. Addressing the revolving door policy or phenomenon, which to the layman's understanding would have concerned only one position, Chief of Staff, we ended up in the law giving fixed tour of duties to 14.
If I may say,
in 11709.
if I may correct you, Mr. President, it's not fixed, it's maximum tour of duty. We
No,
deleted
in 11709, I think.
yes.
I'm
That's why-
referring to 11709, yes.
That's why I was
So,
trying to amend
yes.
the phrase fixed term of duty.
Yes, ganun po ang nangyari. So, but can I go back to the original issue at hand, which led to RA 11709? What is wrong? What is basically wrong with this so-called revolving door policy, where there's a Chief of Staff, and then when the Chief of Staff appointed reaches mandatory retirement age, definitely magre-retire siya. Sabi ng batas, hanggang doon lang siya. Then someone is appointed in his place. So what's wrong with that, Mr. President?
Well, honestly, to tell you frankly, Mr. President, we really have no idea why it was 14 key officers and not merely limited to the Chief of Staff. These 14 officers will be occupying their positions for 3 years without any movement. And I do not know because I was, again, honestly, I was not a party to this to this bill when this was enacted into law, when this was deliberated here in the Senate. So again, these 14 officers will be occupying their positions for 3 years without any movement, causing bottleneck in promotions and increased significantly the attrition rate in the armed forces of the Philippines.
So, so is having AFP chiefs of staff for very short period of time an evil to be avoided, Mr.
Yes,
President?
because they cannot continue their policies, or they cannot institute reforms in the AFP. Kung 2 buwan lang sila, 6 na buwan, o 1 taon, they cannot continue what they want to achieve in the armed forces of the Philippines. That is what we are trying to avoid right now. That's why we are giving them a maximum tour of duty of 3 years. I think 3 years is more than enough to achieve the reforms that they want to institute in the armed forces of the Philippines.
Well, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Mr. President, is probably, if not the most, one of the most professional organizations in the country.
Yes, actually, Mr. President, if I may add,
Yes, yes.
based on independent surveys, I think the Armed Forces of the Philippines, as an institution here in our country, is the most trusted amongst all the organizations or agencies here in the Philippines.
Tingnan nyo nga, Mr. President, ito napansin ko na meron nga grumblings, di ba, because of RA 11709, and then when the Chief of Staff, the former Chief of Staff was returned as Chief of Staff, yung speech niya, sinabi niya stop complaining. Let us be a professional organization and do our job. And then, ramdam natin na, I think the complaints or the verbalization of the complaints was really lessened or minimized, Mr. President. So that's how professional the AFP is, Mr. President. So, my question is, as a professional organization, meron na they have a long-term plan already, Mr. President, and the existing long-term plan of the AFP, which may be improved or tweaked once in a while, definitely was already formulated way before the current Chief of Staff became Chief of Staff. Baka nga colonel pa lang siya, meron ng long-term plan So,
Long-term plan.
is it really that critical, Mr. President, the personality of the person occupying the position of Chief of Staff, that we are so concerned about this quick turnover of the Chief of Staff, Mr. President?
Well, before the President appoints a Chief of Staff, dumadaan po ito sa Board of Generals, Secretary of National Defense, before they recommend them to the President of the Philippines for him to appoint the next Chief of Staff. And I think all these recommendations by the Board of Generals and by the Secretary of National Defense, kasama AFP, yung Chief of Staff, and also the incumbent Chief of Staff, I think these are ito yung sinasabing cream of the crop, kumbaga. So kahit sino piliin ng presidente ron, acceptable sa ating mga military officers.
So, okay, so do I get it that the sponsor agrees that we have to address this policy of revolving door in the
Oh yes,
AFP?
definitely, Mr. President.
And then we are going beyond the position of Chief of Staff, even up to the
Commanding Generals.
of the, ano ba tawag doon? 3 services o 3 branches? Ano bang tawag po doon?
Three major services, Mr.
3
President.
major services. Apo. So that is and that has been captured in the measure that we are discussing, Mr. President.
Well, if I
Yes.
may add, Mr. President, at the end of the day, the security sector needs stability. We are handling national security matters here. That's why we chose to include the major services, given their functions as program coordinators or program directors, Mr. President.
What does that mean, Mr. President? Program coordinator or program?
No,
What does that mean?
If I may repeat, that's why we chose to include the
Yes.
major services, yung tatlo, Philippine Army, Philippine Navy, Philippine Air Force, given their functions as program directors, Mr. President. They are handling purely administrative affairs, administrative matters, procurement, and training and policies.
Anyway, Mr. President, the policy to extend the safeguards against revolving door was made in 11709 and covered 14 positions. Ngayon,
We limited it
yes,
to
so
5,
this
Mr.
measure
President.
agrees with that policy, except that you are now lessening or limiting the number of positions.
You're correct.
affected. Okay, so we get it, Mr. President, and I think okay, so that was one of the reasons why we heard some grumblings. Because marami yun, 14 positions were given.
Marami pong ma-attrite, Mr.
Were
President.
given 3 years. Fixed. Ang word ng
Yes,
117
fixed.
Fixed, 3 years. But of
Marami
course,
pong,
subject to...
ma-attrite at marami hong hindi makakagalaw. There
Yes,
might be no chance for the junior officers to be promoted to a higher rank, Mr. President. That's why there was some rumors. I don't know if these are true. Some rumors of grumblings within the military, Mr. President.
And then, another cause, Mr. President, would have been the increase in the age of mandatory retirement. Is that correct, Mr. President? The existing law, 11709, made it 59 years of age for all generals. Tama po ba yan? Brigadier General and above. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President.
And this contributed nga to the this circumstance plus the fixed tour of duty of the 14 important positions contributed to the grumblings because there would really be affected officers who have also legitimately and reasonably aspired to become generals. Parang abogado lang po yan, Mr. President. Lahat kami gusto namin maging Supreme Court. Mga ganon. So,
Sooner or later, maging Supreme Court Justice po kayo, Mr. President.
ganon po ba?
Well,
I hope to be appointed by His Honor, our sponsor. If you know what I mean, Mr. President. You know, there's only one position who can appoint.
Mr. President, if I may add, Mr. President, the existing law, RA 11709, extended up to 59 years
Correct.
of age, as what you have mentioned earlier. That would mean minimal retirements for the next 3 years. Wala pong aangat, lahat attrited na.
Okay.
At least 2 batches will be deprived of the opportunity to compete for promotions, Mr. President.
Kasi ang gagawin
That's
ko...
why, sige po.
Ang gagawin ko kasi, Mr. President, iniisa-isa ko ngayon yung dahilan nga, yung source of the grumblings.
Yeah.
So, ang una is the 14 important positions given fixed tours of duty. The solution of our measure is limit the 14 to 5. Kasi
We
kasama
excluded the enlisted personnels.
Hindi naman sila kasama, sir, sa 14 pa eh. So,
Yeah.
hanggang Inspector,
I'm sorry.
Yes, hanggang Inspector
I stand
General
corrected.
po dati. No?
Inspector General,
Yes, sir.
Vice Chief of Staff.
So, our solution is you decreased from
Yes.
14 to 5.
To 5,
Okay.
yes.
And then I think you change the terminology. This time no longer fixed tour of duty. The bill uses
Maximum.
Okay. Well, okay, which already implies that they can be terminated at any time by the president. Pero the bill still makes that clear, di ba?
Yes.
Explicitly stated. Okay. And then, so dun sa second, sir, dun sa 59 years old naman, ano naman po yung ating pag-address doon? Or when we limited the number of positions with maximum tour of duty, would that have solved already the problem?
Well,
Or we really need to touch the 59 years of age as mandatory retirement age?
well, again, Mr. President, wala pong angat at halos lahat ay ma-attright, no? Katulad nga na sinabi ko kanina, at least two classes or two batches ang maapektuhan. A graduated age of compulsory retirement as proposed by your committee will still allow movement in officers occupying ranks below the key officers with maximum tour of duty, Mr. President. And to illustrate it, Mr. President, using the data, the information results from the simulation commissioned by the Armed Forces of the Philippines, instead of 134 colonels, only 117 will be attrited. If we pursue our proposed amendments on graduated retirement age, this number is significantly lower compared to the attrition rate brought about by the existing law, Republic Act 11709. Instead of 93 one-star general, meaning the brigadier general, only 43 will be attrited. And if we talk about the major generals, itong two-star generals, instead of 32 major generals who will be attrited in the existing law, only 20 will be attrited if we amend this law. And sa three-star general, instead of 9 lieutenant generals, only 7 will be attrited, Mr. President.
So, kunyari, let's go to the Major General. Instead of 32 two-star generals, only 20 will be attrited if this bill becomes law. So, we save 12 because we raise the age of retirement. Yan po ba yan?
Yeah, that's right, Mr.
Yan
President.
po yan. Yes, yes. But
Because of the graduated
yes,
retirement age,
because
Mr. President.
we will raise the age. Lowered nga pa. Magiging kasi 59 na pala
Opo.
ngayon, ano? Yes,
Yes, Mr.
59
President.
na po ngayon. We will actually lower it to 58 as far as the two-star general is concerned. Okay. Okay, so we will be able to save some of them. Why will, for example, Mr. President, why will the 20 still be attrited, major generals? Because they will exhaust the tenure in grade, the period for the tenure in grade?
Well, there are lesser 09 positions, meaning the three-star rank, as compared to the 08 positions, yung two-star general rank, Mr. President.
So this is the natural consequence of the table of organization of the AFP. Ganun po ba yan? Pero bakit nakasave po tayo ng 12? Hindi ko pa rin makuha. Kasi, okay, so, how many, o para lang makita pa, how many 09 positions do we have in our table of organization?
We have now 13, Mr. President.
1-3.
Based on the
How many?
Based on the table of organization of the armed forces, we have 13.
13, yes, 1-3. How many 08 positions do we have?
08. We have 51 08 positions, Mr. President.
51.
And yung one star? 127, okay. We have 127 07 positions, Mr. President, for a total of 190 generals.
191? 127, 07, 51, 08,
08 and
13, 09,
09.
and then one
and one chief of staff. That makes a total of 190.
192 yata.
You are a mathematician, maybe you can not even using
192.
a calculator.
Is that
Mr.
confirmed,
President.
Mr. President? 192? 190? Paano naging 190 to?
Uy, makinig kayo sa mathematician.
127 plus 51. Ilan na yun? 178. Plus 13. 191. Plus 1. 192. Tama, sir?
You are the
Is
master
the
in math,
general
Mr. President. So about your...
Pero I think this is not pure math, no, Mr. President.
Simple math.
This is not pure math that you, when we say 5107, 08, 1309,
No.
it means
1308.
1309.
Yes.
1309, yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry.
it doesn't mean the 38 will be attrited, no?
Wait.
It doesn't mean, no?
Not necessarily, Mr. President.
Yes, because the may younger ones pa siguro abot pa. Okay, yes, Mr. President. Okay, so the solution that the committee came up with is to change before 11709, 56 was the mandatory retirement age of all. 11709 made it 59 for
59.
all of those who reached the general ranks. Now
Yes.
the committee solution
Is to graduate it.
to answer the grumblings, let people move up the natural course of promotion is to graduate the mandatory age for 09, 07, 08, and 09, Mr. President. Why does the committee think that this can help the situation, Mr. President?
Well, your committee decided, since the graduated retirement age will, we think, will minimize the effect of fixing the term of certain key positions. And based on my consultations with the junior and senior officers of our Armed Forces of the Philippines, data from the simulation, graduated retirement age is perceived to be the best option that upholds the intent of RA 11709 while addressing the unintended consequences of this said law, Mr. President.
So ito na po yung simulation. Ito na yung sinabi nyo na instead of 32 to start to be attrited 20. Yan a part of the simulation. May
Yes.
I know who did the simulation, Mr. President?
Well, Coco Life Actuarial, Mr. President,
Okay. Didn't
of San Miguel Corporation.
Didn't we tap them to do the simulation for RA 11709 also?
Well, I do not. According to our resource persons here, there was no simulation whatsoever, Mr. President.
Okay, but did the AFP welcome the increase in mandatory retirement age from 56 to 59?
During the last law?
Yes, in the
In this-
117.
in the existing law?
Yes. Did they welcome that? Did they like it? Did they want it?
Well, I am not aware because I was not here yet.
Yeah, what is
during
the
the time.
what is the feedback from military AFP, Mr. President?
Well, according to our beloved general here, they agreed to it because it promotes the continuity of programs, Mr. President.
May we get the name of our resource person, General, Mr. President?
It's General Romel Roldan of the Philippine Air
Roldan.
Force, Mr.
He is one of the
President.
127.
Yes.
07
Yes.
positions. Yeah, Mr.
Including General Omar here, who is watching with us.
How about
Also from the Philippine Air Force.
is Jude already a general, Mr.
No,
President?
he's only a colonel.
Okay.
I don't know if he will be demoted.
Tinignan din ako dito. Baka tinignan
So,
for yung
So we have a simulation. Okay, so how about this change? Kasi there's already an expectation, di ba? This is an existing law. All those who reach the general ranks 07 and above are expected under 11709 to serve until 59. We are going to change the mandatory retirement age, and we are going to make it retroactive. Meron section po rito, tama? Magiging retroactive.
Yes.
So how does the group of generals, the 192 generals, feel about this change in the retirement age, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, there were consultations made with senior and junior officers. In fact, I went there personally to hold a consultative meeting or dialogue with the several junior officers. And no records of consultations were made during the formulation of Republic Act 11709. And to answer your question, Mr. President, the graduated retirement age was a result of these consultations, Mr. President. And again, if I may say again, this is the best option available to avoid the grumblings within the military, Mr. President.
Also coming from those to be affected, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, okay. So the group of generals also gave their inputs. That's good to know,
Mr.
Mr.
President,
President.
galing na po sa kanila, hindi po galing sa inyong committee based on our dialogue, Mr. President.
We also have this concept of forced attrition of officers and then a maximum tenure in grade. Meron pong
Hanapin mo rito.
meron pong mga maximum tenure in grade. For the General Admiral, 3 years. 09, 3 years. 08, 3 years. Brigadier, 07, existing is 3 years. Our bill proposes
2 years.
additional 2 years, so 5 years. Tama po. Tama po.
Tama po kayo, Mr. President.
Yes. And then ito po ba maximum tenure in grade? Was this introduced by 11709? Or this was existing before 11709?
Well, that was existing before, Mr. President.
By law or by just internal memoranda of the AFP?
91. By law, Mr. President, under Republic Act 9188.
9188. Tama. In RA 9188, what was the maximum tenure in grade for the 07, Mr. President?
5 years, Mr. President,
So,
under Republic Act 9.
meaning to say ginalaw.
Binabalik lang po natin yan
meaning
dati.
to say ginalaw din ni RA 11709. Binabalik ngayon
Yes,
natin
ginalaw
sa-
ni 11709 ang RA 9188. Ngayon po ay binabalik na po natin sa 9188.
ano naman po dahilan?
Kasi-
Is this part of the grumblings also?
Well, 3 years of under 3 years under the existing law, meaning 11709, is too short of a time to be promoted to Major General, given the limited positions, Mr. President.
Kasi ang ibig pa bang sabihin nito, you have only a 3-year maximum stay at the rank of Brigadier General or Commodore, and if you don't get promoted, no matter your age, you are attrited?
Yes, Mr. President, ganito po yan. You have 3 years, Brigadier General. You have 2 years to compete for promotion. All right? If you don't get promoted, you cannot get promoted anymore because under this law, you cannot be promoted if you have one more year in service. So automatically, after 3 years, you'll be considered as retired.
So in effect,
Mr.
the
President.
maximum tenure in grade, because of that qualification, that no more promotion if you have less than 1 year of active service remaining, -1 actually.
Yes.
Diba? -1. So kung
So
nakasulat sa
meron
law,
kayong dalawang taon to...
kung nakasulat sa law, kahit itong babaguhin natin, nakasulat for 07, 5 years, actually you have 4 years to secure your promotion.
Correct.
Tama, correct.
Yes, you're
Yes,
correct,
sir,
Mr.
yes, sir.
President.
Okay, sir, is His Honor open to introducing stricter words when it comes to this prohibition that there shall be no promotion or appointment if the officer has less than 1 year of active service remaining before compulsory retirement? Because I think this is already existing law. And yet, from experience in the CA, there have been officers who were not compliant and yet were confirmed in their appointment. So, if His Honor to really put value to this prohibition, kasi stated in the negative po ito, dapat ito mandatory. That's part of statutory construction, and it's in the negative. The sense of the legislator is to make it mandatory. So, if His Honor is open during the period of amendments, that if we can introduce some words saying that appointments in violation of this section shall be null and void, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I am open to all the proposals during the period of amendments, Mr. President.
And
And
then
being the resident, the most experienced lawyer in this chamber, I will bow to your wisdom, Mr. President.
I thank you for that flattering remarks, Mr. President, but I'm not really the most experienced lawyer here. And then, Mr. President, just to standardize our terminology, page 6 of the bill, line 3, we use the term service in grade, diba? And then
Yes.
prior to that, we use tenure in grade. So, if there is no difference,
Yes.
is there a difference?
There is no difference, Mr. President.
there's no
That's why we will
difference.
change it to tenure and
Yes,
grade, Mr.
if we
President.
can-
Thank you for the
If we can
for the
standardize
correction, Mr. President.
our terms, Mr. President. Okay. And then I noticed that the tenure in grade for 06, colonel or captain in the Philippine Navy, we also now change from 8 to 10 years. Ito po bang 8 ay dahilan ng RA 11709 at ito po bang 10 ay galing naman sa RA 9188? Ganun
Yes,
po ba?
Mr. President.
So bumabalik, babalik lang tayo.
Your committee feels that 8 years is too short of a time for a colonel to be promoted, given the limited allocations of positions for a rank of Brigadier General, Mr. President. And at the same time, we are maximizing the experience and expertise of our colonels by allowing them 2 more years to compete for promotions, Mr. President. By reverting to the 10-year tenure in grade for colonel, we are addressing one of the major concerns in implementing the existing law, which is RA 11709. And this will address the rumblings or the unintended adverse consequences of the existing law, Mr.
And
President.
we're just returning to rules which are familiar already to the military, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President.
Kasi yung mga the colonels before them, binigyan ng 10 taon sila biglang 8 years
Yes.
na lang. Okay.
That's why
But-
we are reverting it back to
Yeah.
10 years.
But at any rate, yung 8 years na rule na yon, if this passes into law, in effect more or less 1 year lang enforced. Tama po ba yan, Mr. President?
Yes, tama po kayo, Mr. President.
So, walang apektado? Wala namang apektado po, no?
Dito wala po.
When we change the tenure in grade and lengthen it, no one is detrimentally affected, Mr. President. All beneficial.
Hindi po natin maiwasan. Meron pa rin maapektuhan, pero it will be lesser this time, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, ito pong Section 4 natin, which, Section 5, which amends the Section 15 of RA 11709. We are introducing some new words. Okay lang po yung the Secretary of National Defense in consultation with the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Why do we need to insert this phrase in consultation with the Armed Forces of the Philippines? Hindi po ba automatic na lang yun? Hindi ba automatic po yun na talaga namang nangungonsulta si Secretary of National Defense sa AFP, Mr. President?
Well, it is incumbent upon with the Secretary of National Defense to consult the armed forces of the Philippines, Mr. President. Because in the previous law, or in the existing law, wala po nakalagay na consultation. That is why I think it is incumbent on the Secretary of National Defense to consult the hierarchy of the armed forces of the Philippines.
If there is a difference in opinion, Mr. President, whose side will prevail?
Well, it is, I think, the Secretary of National Defense, Mr. President.
And how does the AFP express its opinion, Mr. President?
Paano kayo nagmi-meeting? Usually in writing, and after in writing, they will have a meeting, and after meeting, maybe they will have a get-together, Mr. President.
Kaya, is the opinion of the Chief of Staff the opinion of the AFP?
Not necessarily, Mr. President.
So, what is this, Mr. President? How is the opinion expressed? If it's in writing, who are the signatories which must appear in that opinion, Mr. President?
Sole Secretary. I think the sole signatory is the Secretary of National Defense, Mr. President. And for the AFP, it is the Chief of Staff.
The Chief of Staff.
Yes.
Okay, he does his own consultation pababa, siguro.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ngayon, Mr. President, our Section 15, we also inserted the words increase or before decrease. So page 6, line 21. The gist of Section 15 is the officer grade distribution that the Secretary of National Defense can implement the gradual increase in the number of officers in each rank. Since this is an insertion, meaning to say existing law says shall implement the gradual decrease. So meaning to say policy was determined long ago to decrease the number of officers in each rank. Now we are making it more flexible, decrease or increase.
Increase or decrease?
So why is that, Mr. President? Malaki pong pagbabago yun because kung ibig sabihin noon, ang naisip siguro noon masyadong top-heavy ang organizational chart. Maraming officers compared sa enlisted personnel. Now, isn't that true now? Now we allow the increase in the officers?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. The reason why we inserted the phrase increase or, because it depends on the modernization program of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Kasi itong, the existing law, RA 11709, mandated the decrease to 1%. It was the only law that provided the decrease, Mr. President.
So 11709 was responsible for making Section 15, Paragraph 1, sa Paragraph 1, read as 1%. 1% in the general/flag officer grade based on the total officer strength. Before 11709, what was that percentage, Mr. President?
1.125, Mr. President.
Binabalik ngayon itong ano mo.
Right.
Okay. Yes, please. Yes.
Mr. President,
Mr. President,
Senator Risa might want
Senator Risa,
to interject.
please recognize.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. With the indulgence of the good sponsor and the good minority leader, just one interjection related to the current interpellation, SP, Mr. President. Salamat po. I raise this point now, good sponsor, because the good sponsor mentioned the AFP modernization program. So my related question po is, the bill provides under Section 5 that the officer grade distribution shall be in line with the AFP modernization program with the corresponding percentages under the AFP table of organization, which the good sponsor was also discussing with the good minority leader. For now, we assume that the most number of officers are assigned to the Philippine Army. With our current issue with China in the West Philippine Sea, shouldn't the AFP be focusing and rebuilding our Navy and Air Force assets, and with that, the corresponding increase in personnel and officers for these two major services? I, of course, appreciate, good sponsor, that this may not be directly related to the bill at the present time, pero interesante pong pag-isipan since the Senate is always trying to support the AFP in its modernization program, as well as tayo po yung treaty-making body at kumbaga kapartner ng Presidente in expressing foreign policy. So that's my question. Salamat kaayo, Mr. President, and to the two gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, the gentle lady from the Philippines. Anyway, from Panay Island. Anyway, Mr. President, we already are, Mr. President. The succeeding modernization are geared towards addressing external defense. That is also why we are pushing for the TO, or the Table of Organization, as our basis, Mr. President.
As I read Section 15 of RA 11709, Mr. President, parang ang sinasabi kasi nito, the Secretary, the SND, shall implement the gradual decrease in the number of officers as follows. Kasi dinecrease nga pala niya si 1.125%, ginawa niyang 1%.
Yeah,
So
kung
it was
1% po, magiging 160 lang, no? 130.
It was actually just a description, Mr. President. It's a description that we are decreasing the number of officers, given the subparagraphs under Section 15. Ngayon, if we insert the words increase or decrease, what is the effect, Mr. President, that the Secretary of National Defense is empowered to increase or decrease the percentages mentioned in the subparagraphs, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, he can increase, but subject to the percentages provided, Mr. President.
For example, Mr. President, kunyari, let's go to subparagraph 2. 6% in the grade of colonel/captain based on the total officer strength under the AFP Table of Organization. Okay. If this bill becomes law, the Secretary...
You are reading page
7, line 13. I'm just choosing a random example,
all right,
Mr.
all right.
President. Can the Secretary of National Defense increase that 6% and make it 7% or 6.5%?
No, Mr. President.
That's correct, Mr. President. He cannot. He cannot.
He cannot.
So what is the...
Ito yung safeguards na inilagay po natin.
What's the value of the inserted words increase or decrease, Mr. President?
Well,
Because the 11709 decreased, kasi sabi nyo 1.125% yung general or flag officer grade, ginawang 1%. So dinescribe ni introductory paragraph ni Section 15 that the Secretary of the National Defense shall implement the decrease. So, if we accept this interpretation, then we can probably avoid using both words, increase or decrease, if His Honor is open to this amendment, Mr. President, at the proper time.
yes, Mr. President, thank you for your masterful research, Mr. President. Mr. President, certain percentages have yet to be reached.
Yeah.
Okay? The numbers provided are the ideal numbers under the previous law,
Correct.
Republic Act 9188, Mr. President. We are merely reinstituting it, Mr. President.
That's correct, Mr. President. So maybe because we are making a change which is an increase, so that word decrease in the RA 11709 has lost its meaning. So, and it cannot be cured by by stating increase or decrease. So I think we should just we can amend the amend the introductory paragraph just to be factual. Siguro that the National Secretary of National Defense, in consultation with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, shall prescribe the authorized number of officers in the active force in each grade and each major technical or administrative service as part of and in line with the modernization program of the AFP, Mr. President.
Well,
Kasi I suspect that word decrease was really not empowering the SND to decrease, but a description that the following paragraphs, because a percentage was lessened, that the number was really decreased by the law, Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President. The increasing and decreasing number will provide the Armed Forces of the Philippines flexibility to address uncertain and volatile security environment, Mr. President. And the percentages provide for the cap,
Yes.
but it need not necessarily be reached, Mr. President.
Yes. So it's a cap, Mr. President. So the number, for example, let's just choose another example. Page 7, line 20. 18% in the grade of Major Lieutenant Commander based on the total officer strength under the AFP table of organization. So, si Secretary of National Defense can fill up to 18%.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, so there is no, he cannot increase the 18%.
Excuse
Because
me?
that's the law.
He
That's
can-
the law. He cannot increase.
he cannot, he
Yes,
cannot.
yes, so.
He cannot, Mr.
So,
President.
by introducing the words increase or decrease, we are actually introducing words which can lead more lead to more confusion, Mr. President. Kasi cap, klaro naman na cap eh. Cap. And for as long as it is not yet reached, if they add majors or lieutenant commanders, not breaching the 18%, there is no violation of the law, Mr. President.
Yes, maybe, Mr. President, in the proper time, maybe the period of amendments, maybe we can,
Yes, we'll study it, Mr.
Your Honor
President.
may want to propose some amendments with regard to this provision, Mr. President.
Just to avoid unintended consequences, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Pasensya na po, Mr. President, kasi this time to
Ay, dyan magkamali, Mr. President.
really avoid the unintended consequences, each and every word dadaanan na po natin dito sa bill na ito. Ngayon, Mr.
So
President,
long as the flexibility is there,
Yeah.
we are open, we are amenable to have this provision amended, Mr. President.
Ngayon, Mr. President, balik na po tayo sa siguro last point ko na lang din po ito na balik tayo sa original issue, which was the revolving door policy at the level of the Chief of Staff. Is our sponsor open to the idea of limiting this grant of a maximum, ano ba tawag nito? Maximum tour of duty only to one position, which is the AFP Chief of Staff. But as a footnote siguro, allowing the PMA Superintendent a 4-year, maximum 4-year tour of duty. Kasi ibang konsepto po ron. We're not using military concepts there. We are using state universities and colleges concept there, or principle there, Mr. President. So, yun lang po. So, in effect, my question affects the 3 major services kasi in-extend natin yung maximum tour of duty sa kanila.
Mr. President, we are hoping to grant tour of duty to major service commanders like the 3 commanding services, no? Given their function as administrative and program directors, Mr. President. It will espouse continuity of policies and and they also handle the procurement, which is very, very crucial if the board is unstable, Mr. President.
Well, anyway, Mr. President, the granting of this tour of duty to the commanders of the major services is a relatively new idea, Mr. President.
Yes,
Kasi,
upon consultation
it's,
with the junior and senior officers, this is what we came out.
Ang gusto kong sabihin, Mr. President, hindi pa rin naman ito nakakaugat sa military organization na nakasanayan na nila ito actually. This is a new idea which also now deprives the more junior officers of the quicker opportunity to be promoted to these three major positions, Mr. President. Well, at any rate, Mr. President, ito na lang po sigurong last point ko na. Yung sa, balik po ako dun sa number of officers, no? Section 15, Mr. President, which is Section 15 of RA 11709, which is Section 5 of our bill, which claims that the decrease in the number of officers in each officer rank is in line with the modernization program of the AFP. So, was that really the philosophy or the direction taken by the AFP when they adopted this modernization program, which is really to decrease the number of officers? Siguro there was a consensus noon na may top-heavy. Balik siguro tayo, what is the international or best practice ratio of officer to enlisted men or personnel, Mr. President?
Just to give you an illustration, Mr. President, pag bumili tayo ng helicopter, Mr. President, dati, 2 piloto lang ang kailangan. But with the purchase of new helicopters, we need 4 pilots since they have the capability for night flying. Nag-modernize na nga tayo. Dati hindi naman pwede lumipad yung ating mga helicopters during nighttime. Even our Air Force helicopters cannot fly because they do not have the night capability for flying. Our modern ships also require more officers to man more modern capabilities and weapon system, Mr. President. Yun lang po ang...
Yes, sir. Thank you for that enlightening reply, Mr. President. Ako mismo na enlighten po sa sagot. Tama. So, there was something wrong with how Section 15 was phrased before, Mr. President. So, we will fix it in due time. Ito, decrease in the number, medyo it gives us the impression that that was already the direction or the decision made, Mr. President. So, ano pa ba yung last complaint?
Hindi ba okay nagugutom, Mr. President?
Hindi, isa na lang, Mr. President, actually. Medyo nalimutan ko lang. Anyway, yung two cycle, although this was already explained to me in the corridor, the 2 cycles,
Yes,
can we make it of record lang, Mr. President, so that it will be part of our transcript? What Section 3 mentions... Section 3 of the bill, page 6, line 6, mentions 2 cycles in the possibility of promotion, Mr. President. What does that mean, Mr. President?
Well, 2 cycles means 2 years of promotions, Mr. President. The ranks of captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels may be lengthened up to 2 cycles, Mr. President. So, ang ibig sabihin po nun, 2 years of promotions, Mr. President.
Meaning to say that the tenure in grade can also actually be, for example, if it's given 7 years, that can also be actually +2, -1. Kasi may 1 year pa yung, so 7, on paper 7, tenure in grade, +2 is the 2 cycles allowance, -1, which is the prohibition on promotion with 1 year left. Ano po ba yan?
Mr. President, the prohibition does not apply to captains, to majors. It only applies to colonels up, colonels, brigadier generals.
Yes, sir. I see the difference in the yes, in the wording. So yes, so that means that for the example for the 05, tenure in grade is 7 years plus 2, which is the allowance which the president, only the president can give this, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
President.
okay, thank you. Now, ito pong last point po to, napag-usapan na rin po natin. How about a wholesale, Mr. President, wholesale increase
In age.
in the compulsory retirement age? But increase siya before from 56, but actually bababa na siya if it does not reach 59. So let us say from 56 to either 57 or 58, because it is our observation and a given fact that life expectancy has also increased, and then the productivity, the overall health of the 56-year-old is much better than the 56-year-old maybe 30 years ago, Mr. President. I'm just soliciting the opinion of our sponsor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. My answer would still be the same, Mr. President. That would mean minimal requirements for the next 3 years, minimal retirements for the next 3 years. Wala rin angat at lahat ma-attrite, Mr. President. At least, again, as I mentioned earlier, at least 2 batches will be deprived of the opportunity to compete for promotions, Mr. President. And the graduated age of compulsory retirement, as proposed by your committee, will still allow the movement in officers occupying ranks below the key officers with maximum tour of duty, Mr. President.
So thank you for that answer, Mr. President. Another enlightening response, Mr. President. Tama, di lahat na nga pala nakapwesto na no? So
Opo.
parang wala nang gagalaw. So thank you for the time given to this representation, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I hope that we have been able to, but of course, we can never be sure, no? Na we have anticipated everything, or we have anticipated all possible scenarios, but we tried our best, Mr. President, to go over even the letter and the punctuation mark of the bill, Mr. President, to make sure that,
Yes, Mr. President.
as far as humanly possible, limit the unintended consequences.
My
Mr. President.
staff will coordinate with your staff, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Malamig na po ang sabaw ninyo, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Just a time check. It's Valentine's Day, and we're nearing the 6 p.m. mark. So we suspend session for 1 minute. We're looking. Sorry, Minority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we, no other member wishes to interpolate and debate on the proposed measure, Mr. President, and so I move that we close the period of interpellations and debates. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, Majority Leader, the period of interpellation is closed.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1849. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, Senate Bill number 1849 is hereby suspended consideration.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 15, 2023. I so move, Mr. President. and
Before I
happy
act on
Earth
the
Day.
motion, I saw the smile of Senator Sherwin Gatchalian that he has a date tonight, our eligible bachelor,
The hottest.
being the Valentine's Day is today. I just want to wish everybody a happy Valentine's Day. Please stay safe.
Safe from?
I will no longer add to my statements. There being no objection to the session, I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday, February 15, 2022. 2023, rather.